Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thanks for joining us for today's event, Embodied Witnessing, Art, Water, Resistance, Survival. We would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, and we respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. And here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge. We co-create daily activities that examine research questions and projects, things happening across the university. Now, we're running today's event as a live stream both to YouTube as well as a Zoom meeting. So those of you joining us on Zoom, we welcome your comments or questions via the chat. If you pop those into the chat, our team will do our best to read them out a little bit later. Those of you here in the space, if you have some comments or questions later, just raise your hand. We'll run a microphone around so that everyone can hear. It's now very much my pleasure to pass the microphone over to doctoral student in interdisciplinary humanities in the research creation stream, as well as Concordia Public Scholar this year. Laura Magnusson, it's great to have you.
Woohoo. Welcome, everyone. Please make yourself at home. There's coffee and some sparkling water and Timbits at the back. My name's Laura Magnusson, and I'm an interdisciplinary artist and current public scholar at Concordia, where I'm pursuing my PhD in interdisciplinary humanities. I work across video, drawing, sculpture, installation, and underwater research creation. I'm developing artistic strategies to communicate lived impacts of sexual violence and its institutional aftermath. I position art as visual testimony, drawing on my experiences as a survivor to render visible affective and relational dimensions of violence often excluded from official accounts. A trained scuba diver who is filmed underwater in Iceland and Mexico, I think, write and create performative work at depth, exploring how underwater embodiment can support the processing and communication of traumatic knowledge. My work asks how watery practices might disrupt fixed linear expectations of institutional reporting, opening to more fluid conditions for witnessing. I wanted to share a little anecdote about my own interest in the confluence of art and water and resistance, and I guess survival as well. When I was healing from my sexual assault, my dad suggested that we learn how to scuba dive together, because I've always had a fascination with water. And in that trip, where we went to Cozumel, Mexico, where I would later make underwater work, I noticed that being underwater, maybe the pressure acting on my body, being supported and buoyed by water, being in an entirely different milieu, allowed me to sense and feel my body in different ways. And it may sound strange, but it was almost easier to breathe underwater in that space. I felt like the ocean could receive me in that moment that I was in. And so from that moment back in 2016, I just felt an urge and an instinct that I wanted to continue to explore being underwater, scuba diving, and also trying to make work in this environment. So that's kind of my backstory of how I came to these topics. And I'm excited today that we have a full day symposium bringing together scholars, practitioners engaging artistic and watery practices as modes of resistance and survival. And we have a full day. The event emerges in relation to trauma, grief, memory, kinship, and healing under conditions of systemic oppression, colonialism, forced migration, racism, gendered violence, incarceration, illness, climate crisis, and cultural erasure. Witnessing is approached as embodied and relational processes, lived, felt, and negotiated across individuals, communities, ecosystems, other than human presences, and waters bearing histories of violence and survival. Through a panel somatic workshop keynote by the brilliant Dr. Ayana Omilade Flewellen, Assistant Professor of Anthropology at Stanford University, who will be joining us online, and research creation exhibition, the event explores how artistic and watery practices might open more fluid conditions for communication, render perceptible internal, often unseen dimensions of lived experience, and contest institutional frameworks that impose linearity, fixity, and closure. So I'm gonna share a little bit about the schedule, but first I want to extend some big thank yous. This event is made possible with the generous support from the School of Graduate Studies Public Scholars Program, the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Society and Culture, the Visual Methods Studio, and the Concordia Council on Student Life. And of course, the many folks who are contributing presentations and artworks and presents, and other people supporting the day, including Sarah Balkas, who is documenting and helping out behind the scenes. And of course, to Fourth Space. Over my term as a public scholar, I received mentorship from the program and from Fourth Space on how to put together an event. And so what you will experience today is due in large part to that mentorship. So thank you to the Fourth Space team. So in a few moments, we're gonna get started with our panel, Embodied Witnessing, Watery Approaches. After the panel and discussion, we'll have a free pizza lunch with vegetarian and vegan and gluten-free options. We will then reconvene and have a talk and experiential offering by Danielle K. Garrison, who will be joining us online. Danielle is a doctoral researcher in dance at Concordia and Montpellier University. And Danielle's presentation is called Tethering, Effective Touch in Horizontal Aerial Fabrics, Somatic Sensing, and Heart-Centered Relational Ethics of Consent. We will then be joined by Dr. Flewellen for the keynote presentation. Dr. Flewellen is a Black feminist, an archaeologist, an artist, scholar, and a storyteller. As a scholar of anthropology and African diaspora studies, Flewellen's intellectual genealogy is shaped by critical theory rooted in Black feminist epistemology and pedagogy. Their presentation today, which will be at 2:30 p.m., is called Submerged in the Wake, Archaeology, Memory, and Oceanic Archives of Transatlantic Slave Trade. And Dr. Flewellen characterized the keynote as exploring how the excavation of 16th to 19th century slave shipwrecks is generating unprecedented ways of feeling and reckoning with the afterlife of slavery. Through underwater ethnographic work with divers who excavate these vessels, analysis of museum exhibits that use newly recovered artifacts to build immersive slave ship hull reconstructions on land, and exploration of emerging artistic practices ranging from visual work depicting artists submerged in oceanic depths to underwater memorials to the transatlantic slave trade. Flewellen traces how the physical act of diving to these wreck sites creates new forms of embodied historical memory that surface from the ocean floor to reshape contemporary understandings of the Middle Passage. So this keynote is not to be missed. It's gonna be amazing. And then after the keynote, we have a dedicated period for our research creation exhibition, which is on view throughout the day, but you can visit it during breaks and also during the lunch, but we'll have a dedicated time with artists. We'll have art workshops and activities, and artists will be present for conversation. So that will be an exciting cap to the day later on. So it is now time for our panel. We have 6 people on the panel. In person, we have Meghan Moe Beitiks, Florencia Marchetti, and Fenyx Florentiny. And online, we have Patarin-Jossec, Ellie Schmidt, and Bruna bonanno. I am so excited to bring together these brilliant scholars and artists. Each panelist will give a 10 to 15 minute presentation of their work, and then we'll have a break, and then we'll have a discussion afterwards. And as you listen to the presentations, I want to invite you to think about questions that you might have for the panelists, because my hope for this is to have a collective experience where the audience is participating in the discussion in the Q&A. So I invite you to participate should you desire to do so. So across these 6 presentations and the discussion afterward, we are going to hear about the process of becoming an atmospheric thinker. We are going to take a deep dive and explore the worlds of underwater drawing and underwater welding. We are going to learn about pirate dramaturgy. We're going to think with mangroves, mucus, and sargassum. And we're going to look to commonalities across species and disciplines as means of developing resilience and cultivating communities. So let's get started. First up, we have Meghan Moe Beitiks. And Beitiks works with associations and dissociations of culture, nature, structure. They analyze perceptions of ecology through the lenses of sight, history, emotions, and her own body in order to produce work that examines relationships with the non-human. The work emerges as video, performance, installation, writing, or photography, depending on what arises from her process of research and improvisation. So welcome, Mo.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for organizing this day. I'm super excited, and I can't wait to hear what everybody else has to present and say. There's a lot of really exciting work gathered here for this, so thanks so much. So I'm going to just kind of give a couple of different little snippets of work that I've been doing within this theme of like gender perception and ecological entanglement. The first is a short video of a piece I did about specifically water and transness in the context of laws in Florida, where I came from before here. And then I'll read a small excerpt of my book, Performing Resilience for Systemic Pain, which has to do with a lot with perception, and then show you a snippet of the work that book is based on. So that's going to be the whole shebang of stuff. Look, the robot works, yay! It's a video. It's 4 minutes, we'll watch it. Assuming it plays. One moment, now I pause. As background for this video, as it loads, the title is Moisture Recycling Salty Queer Hydrologies, and it is a juxtaposition of sort of legal battles around trans rights within hydrologic diagrams. So go ahead if you can.
These reductive trolls. These reductive trolls. So breakable. Prohibited from history, hindsight, and some goddamn common sense is a refutable, hyperlogical faith. These reproductive roles. And that it is false to ascribe your own nose into someone else's business. These reductive trolls are contrary, unstable, and so breakable. Critical race theory rhetoric. That it is false to ascribe to a person a pronoun that does not correspond to a person. Trolls. A person's sex is a refutable, hyperlogical faith.
So that is moisture recycling. It's sort of building on a language of materiality that I've articulated in this book that I'll now read excerpts from, Performing Resilience for Systemic Pain. So in performance and its studies, ideas of embodiment come up often. In acting, performers embody characters. In making performance art, the bodies of the performers have material meaning. Bodies mean things. Invariably, identity presentation becomes a crucial issue within which gender is a central concern. So we come back to Butler, who perpetually revisits ideas of performance and gender from multiple angles in her work in a considered expansion of performativity. Performance is always an action or an event that involves a number of people, objects, networks, and institutions, even when performance takes place without a stage and in the briefest of moments. So performance is not the self-constituting activist subject who is grounded nowhere acting alone. If performance brings a subject into being, it does so only in terms of the social and material coordinates and relationships that make it possible or that form its scene of intervention. Gender is one of the many things that is not fully separate from its community, context, network. In the same way that will and pain are not ours alone, our identities are not just solo performances of expression, but part of a network of cultural influences, social norms and punishments, materials with gendered and racial connotations, layers of self that are something other than those signifiers. So a lot of this section is about me encountering this wallpaper that I used in this installation, which was sold in a nearby wallpaper shop, and which was for some reason labeled as masculine. So that sends me off into a whole spinning consideration of like, why? Which then becomes the intellectual stuff that you're about to hear. And so while many a hardworking actor has lent complexity to roles that have themselves been written with complexity, the character can still be a flattening structure. The demand to be authentically one thing, specifically a thing that is subservient to a story, extends even to objects. A dramatic principle of Chekhov's was that a gun introduced in the first act needed to go off by the final curtain. That is, if an object wasn't going to explicitly serve the plot, it didn't belong on stage. Like a tree only valued for its healing properties or the quality of its wood, ignoring the value of the oxygen it produces, the nutrients its leaves add to the soil, its entanglements with other trees, lichens, animals, and bacteria. To reduce a thing to a singular role or value is a drastic disservice to the thing in its own right. We are not singular entities, we are ecologies of self. And so people are complicated. Wallpaper appears not to be. It is a flat paper with an adhesive backing on one side and a design on the other. It is bereft of a whole extra layer of biological sex. It reproduces creatively and industrially, not by some orifice or appendage that connects to another one of its wallpaper species, and which might be confused with gender. But it does create ambiance, mood, space, and those things can be heavily gendered. What's tripping me up about the gendering of the wallpaper is that the pattern seems to be totally absent of anything that might stereotypically connote masculine in Western culture. No logs, no bricks, no what? Plaids, stone, axes, guns, angry social media, naked, muscular, oversexed bodies, and even the predominant color, this like muted yellowy beige, doesn't point to anything except warmth. Its labeling as masculine renders both the framing and its usual signifiers sort of absurd. Butler again, genders then are neither true nor false, neither real nor apparent, and yet one is compelled to live in a world in which genders constitute univocal signifiers, in which gender is stabilized, polarized, rendered discrete and intractable. In effect, gender is made to comply with a model of truth and falsity, which not only contradicts its own performative fluidity, but serves a social policy of gender regulation and control. In cultures with heavily Western normative understandings of gender and being real, race, sex, disability, to exist outside the norm on any level is to suffer an endless scrutiny, a perpetual questioning of personal character in the real-life sense of virtue, wisdom, and personality, often to emotionally or physically violent levels. In these social contexts, character, as a means for evaluating the reliability of a real-life non-conforming person, is considered in terms of integrity, but actually has a closer relationship to a fictional entity. What's being scanned for is not actually moral dependability, but for a kind of social avatar, a consistency within visual, verbal, and social paradigms. The signposts of integrity are inevitably tied to gendered signifiers. What it means to be reliable, consistent, dependable is first predicated on what expectations are of the gendered norms. Scrutiny and punishment are performed both verbally and non-verbally. Integrity is evaluated by often irrelevant parameters like skin color, clothing, or the consistent use of valued words, or strictly according to social conformity. So that's me spinning out about wallpaper. And then the last video, to try to keep it close to time, is, so that book, Performing Resilience for Systemic Pain, is basically a deconstruction or theoretical analysis of a series of research creation works that I did over a number of years called Systems of Pain / Networks of Resilience. And what I would do is that every location I would interview people and professionals with experiences of healing and recovery, and I would juxtapose clips from those interviews with each other and kind of add to the bank at every location. And then the audio of those interviews became a performance score for me at different locations to make different videos and live performances. So this is an excerpt of a piece that I did partially submerged in water briefly. So go ahead.
And walks away.
To reinsert yourself in a society that doesn't look anything or feel anything like the one that you have lived or known or studied, but you want to because you know that you need to have a place called home.
A time-lapsed shot of the table inside a small outdoor pen. Clouds roll forward and back as the footage rewinds and replays. In the pen, the person uses the orange harness to pull the table across the grass. At times, the table seems to resist, like a farm animal might. The person bolts back the two swung-out legs of the now unharnessed table.
So a lot of times we warn people that there's an ugly phase to restoration.
Maybe the bird population is very happy with the vines, so that we should leave them, or certain animals really thrive on them. But the consensus was that no, the vines are really killing the trees, and the birds are happy just with the trees and they don't need the vines. So we finally decided to start taking the vines down.
2 oranges lie in a shallow creek. The person places the table onto the creek in front of the chair and a basket of oranges. They sit down in the chair.
Bringing in more diversity in the hopes that there'll be a greater resiliency to climate change.
Shown on shadows cast onto the creek, the person puts a white tablecloth on the table, a wide shot of the creek. The person rearranges the oranges lined up on the table.
We could pause it there, I think.
Taking yourself out of the situation.
It's almost done, but I don't want to take up too much more time. As for to say, there's one note I didn't make is that there's audio description layered into all of the works in this particular work. And that was not just a move towards accessibility, but it was also incorporated into the work as a commentary on perception. What I found is that there's rules in audio description in terms of how you are meant to describe in an objective way, but a lot of that objectivity is left up to the describer themselves. And how they describe things and where it lives in relationship to what you're actually seeing shifts your perception of those things if you're able to witness the image at the same time. So I wanted to so I collaborated with a number of professional audio describers to kind of creatively think through this experience of perception in the work. So that's me. That's a bunch of stuff. And we'll talk about it later, but yay, awesome. Next.
I'll introduce you. Thank you so much, Mo. That was an amazing analysis of wallpaper. Next up, we have Florencia Marchetti, who is a multimodal thinker and maker, a creative consultant, a dialogic facilitator, and a migrant mother living in Chichoge, Munyang, Montreal. Born in Argentina during times of political upheaval, their master's and doctoral research projects explored the atmospherics of terror produced by the military dictatorship that ruled their home country during the first years of her life. Through experimental ethnographic writing and participatory compositional practices, she creates sensory-attuned memoryscapes that convey the political and affective resonances of violent and tender pasts in everyday lives. Her early documentary work is housed at the Provincial Memory Archive and also featured in the permanent exhibit at Campo de la Ribera, a site museum and state-funded space for the promotion of human rights, both in Cordoba, Argentina. Her research creation works have been showcased in local and international academic, artistic, and communal settings. Thank you so much, Florencia.
Thank you. So I wrote this presentation in response to Laura's generous invitation to think about artistic and watery practices that render unseen dimensions of lived experience perceptible. And what came out is a narrative that follows the undercurrents of my research creation practices, the affective threads that pull me into specific directions, the knots that hold it together with holes and all. So thank you, Laura, for the opportunity to articulate this, and thank you all for listening with the tender care that these topics require. I'm going to read my presentations. I'm going to do this. In the beginning, there were flowers. Beautiful flowers I had bought at the farmer's market the summer we separated. They kept me company, colorful cheers in that beautiful Victorian house we had made together on Jordan Street. They were so beautiful I didn't want to part with them, so I let them dry slowly on their vase, and I was amazed at the beauty in their decay. Zooming into their drying process through the lens of my camera opened a perceptual portal, not one that I consciously chose to enter, but one that was calling me in. With them, I learned that there was beauty to be found in letting go, in letting dry, in letting things rot, be transformed in the afterlife of living. I photographed many more drying flowers that year, and a selection of those photos became Flores Secas, a photo essay I published online, along with the lyrics of the song that inspire its title. Creating this series was a way of mourning a broken marriage built on shaky foundations and so much more. At a time when it was really hard for me to find the words to articulate what was crumbling inside, the haunting beauty of drying flowers came to the rescue, as did the music, which reappeared in my mind out of nowhere one day, as it often happens, reminded me that I had already learned the words that could name the kind of affective charge that was moving through me. Not only the grief of that relationship ending, but a swell of traumatic memories needing to be expressed, to be explored, to be brought out of the shadows. And it was this careful witnessing of the flower's life and death cycles that guided me towards the next leg of the journey. Dos. This is a brief theoretical interlude, because I thought witnessing is an idea that would be interesting to bring forward today, since it expands the legal notion of witness to a relational and aesthetic arena. And it is a concept originally elaborated by an artist and thinker, Braha Ettinger, that Griselda Pollock then reworks, and that I learned from a dear Concordia colleague and friend, Magdalena Olszanowski, in her dissertation work, Girl is a four-letter word. So I thought we could read together the highlighted parts in Art Today. And this is a text from 2010. So I'm really looking forward to hearing how things have moved forward in this direction. It's very exciting. We're moving from fantasy to trauma. Contemporary aesthetics is moving from the phallic structure to the matrixual sphere. We are carrying, at the beginning of the 20th century, enormous traumatic weight, and aesthetic witnessing in art brings it to culture's surface. Certain contemporary art practices bring to light matrixual alliances by confronting the limits of trauma's shareability and the jouissance of the other, and we're definitely doing this today here. Below in Pollock's writing, what Ettinger creates is a neologism. Witness implies being with someone else. But she does not replace the word, she expands it, right? She expands the conceptual range of this legal notion and its testimonial meaning of bearing witness to a crime against another, to being with, but not assimilated to, and to being beside the other in a gesture that is much more than mere ethical solidarity. So there is risk involved in this, but there's also a sharing, and it's that sharing that I am interested in. A means of being with and remembering for and with the other through the artistic act and through an aesthetic encounter. So I drew this diagram, and I won't go deep into their theoretical disquisitions, which engage with psychoanalysis, but this idea of aesthetic witnessing as an encounter, right, that creates a passage, Pollock says, a connection that can move the traces of a traumatic past into the future, accepting, sharing the burden of the trauma. So the trauma is not only on the person who lived through it, but those who encounter it through these aesthetic encounters. And I think that's a very interesting idea and practice, right, to think with. So while the traumatic Pollock and Ettinger address has to do with the events of mass violence that marked the 20th century, I believe this can also be a useful tool to think about the crossings of larger oppressive structures and the minor traumas that populate our lives, that shape our art and our engagement with the world. Interlude finished. 3. I began my PhD journey and my new life in Montreal, keen on deepening my research about the traces of state-sponsored terror amongst the neighbors of clandestine detention centers where people were tortured during the military dictatorship that governed my home country, Argentina, during the mid-70s and early 80s. I had already done documentary work around this and was curious about the air that people breathed in those days, and how we might go about transforming the dictatorial legacy of fear, mistrust, and social fragmentation that each neoliberal-induced crisis seemed to intensify. As a documentarian and participatory researcher, I had learned that dialogic and open-ended creative processes were key to exploring these kinds of effective realms. What I did not know was that my own embodied weaving into that history would be called upon for examination too. I have talked about the details of this process and my research creation doctoral journey in other forums, and I won't repeat the storylines here. But I will briefly say that my research orientation certainly shifted through a series of embodied engagements, through a relational practice that put what I was reading at play in all of my relations, from my experiencing and then collaborating in the making of immersive story installations, to my involvement as a student activist in the Maple Spring movement of 2012, from my reading of feminist and queer theories as transmuting experiences, to my experiments with queer kink and polyamory, from failing a feminist theory comprehensive exam that posed a question I was not able to decipher and answer in the time given, to a period of fieldwork that began with me realizing the minute I landed back in my hometown that I had indeed also suffered and feared and censored myself so much in that place. The fieldwork period was particularly poignant, and there are two things that I would like to mention about it today, which I was only able to put into perspective quite a bit later. One was that I was in a state of freeze. That feeling of being stuck and not able to move through the plan I had crafted became my daily reality. And it's, now I know, I recognize it, a state that is common amongst those with unresolved or unacknowledged trauma, which can be triggered when revisiting the places or situations where those traumas originated. Suffice to say, I did not have the proper support, academic, therapeutic, or otherwise, to serve these waters back then. The other poignant affective thread during this stay in Córdoba was the subtle but persistent feminism in the air. The feminist risings of the mid-20s had not swelled yet, but were marinating. There were gestures and complicities and worries that I could certainly feel accruing. The Ni Una Menos movement would organize their first general strike the year after. When the tides finally rose and took over the streets and our networks, social and otherwise, another wave of realizations came through for me. And that's when the stock finally broke loose. I wrote furiously during those years. I cried, I got mad with family members, ex-lovers, writers, filmmakers, governments, institutional structures, and friendship modalities. The swell was heavy, and it took many seasons for it to recede, leaving me as transformed, of course. 4. It was only after these tides revealing the undercurrents and my own after my own body became again, and this time willingly, a water body world where another being could grow, that I truly became an atmospheric thinker. Though I had always been a hypersensible, highly attuned being who felt a deep kinship with water bodies and currents, open skies, plants, and trees, it wasn't until I had to traverse a painful miscarriage and mourn the traumatic charge it unveiled that my sense of communion with natural world and its cycles deepened. Of course, living in Montreal make the seasonal changes much more acute. Tiohtià:ke, its Mohawk name, means the place where boats and river meets. We are in an island in the middle of water, after all. Snow, ice, slush, rain, fog, rivers, lakes, le fleuve, water everywhere, in every form, make and unmake our days. And as always, a camera lens acting as a magnifying glass, as a microscope, as a framing device with which I was once again able to get closer to the ungraspable nature of my grief. Cinco, and this is the final. The senses sharpen on the surfaces of things taking form. They pick up texture and density as they move in and through bodies and spaces, rhythms and tempi, possibilities likely or not. They establish trajectories that shroud and punctuate the significance of sounds, textures, and movements. This is Kathleen Stewart discussing atmospheric attunements, a key notion that in my dissertation proposal that has now become a vital tenet of how my life flows within and without the confines of academic thinking. My research considered the regime of state-sponsored terror, the dictatorship engineer, in terms of atmospheric attunement, thinking of disappearance as the production of ghosts that haunt a population into submission. My main questions were this: how is the violence a state inflicts on some bodies felt by others, made to witness immuted atmospheres of terror? How does this violence reverberate across time and space? How does it travel, resonate, replicate? It is clear to me now that these questions were another way of expanding the notion of witness, and that my experimental methods of learning with and through aesthetic encounters with humans and more than humans were working towards creating passages and connections that shared, process, and transform the traumatic charge. I spent the following years trying to articulate tentative answers to these questions, but the pandemic, confinement with a 3-year-old, and a deluge of life circumstances made it really hard for me to focus on writing a thesis manuscript. I'm beginning to think perhaps that was a saving grace, though remains to be seen. These days, I find myself moving in and out of mothering time. My kid is 9 years old, my thesis remains unfinished, and I am moving on to working with water more directly. But before I end, I'll share with you a poem that opened and closed my proposal, my dissertation proposal, which I think marks the cyclical nature of time, the sedimentary work of memory, and the possibilities of what I would call atmospheric witnessing. The waters of the river where I learned how to swim when I was a little kid flowed onto a lake where the bodies of some of the people disappeared by the regime were laid to rest. Their bodies rotting on the bottom of that lake, the same one that after the dam feeds another river that flows through the city where most of us lived. The water we drink comes from that second river, which flows from the lake where their bodies remain.
Thank you, Florencia. And thank you for your vulnerability in that presentation. I think it is it's such an important, you raised so many important questions in your presentation that I'm really excited to talk about, because there's so much of working in academia and engaging really difficult subject matter that can be really isolating. And yeah, I'd like to unpack a few things. Thank you. And so we're gonna move online next. It's time for pirate dramaturgy. So we have Bruna Bonanno online. Bruna is a dramaturg and PhD candidate at the University of Milan with a research project focused on dramaturgical practices engaged with radical democracy and salt waters. She is a co-founder of Salmastra, an interdisciplinary collective that works with the Sicilian fishermen's community, and member of Perla, Performance Epistemology's research lab of Love University of Venice, where she is a teaching assistant in dramaturgy. Recently, she has been a visiting scholar at the Antwerp Research Institute for the Arts, at the Public Exchange Bureau at Deakin University in Melbourne, at St. John's University with Steve Mentz in New York City. And her latest dramaturgical project was recently awarded at the 2025 Venice Teatro Biennale and will be premiered, directed by Modus in June 2026. So welcome, Bruna. So happy to have you here.
Oh, hello. Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for this organization. Thank you for the generosity of all. I see myself. That's okay, but it's just to let you know. But so, thank you for all of this, and thank you, Laura, for inviting me. Actually, so Laura and I first approached to a few years ago, through and due to her wonderful work, Blue. I was at the very beginning of my academic research, asking myself what happens if salt waters become a medium, and Blue gave me, as I think I'm trying to understand the old conference about this is how this water, and then I work with salt water, but we will talk a little more. How the water could explore the truly radical, transformative, revolutionary possibility. From there, so from Blue, actually, I came across questions like, okay, let's talk about salt waters, but which kind of salt waters are we talking about? And then I just realized that all the Blue studies and everything that is related to blue or to waters, so meaning the academic knowledge production around salt waters, are basically written and thought in English, American English. So I started working with the Atlantic ways of thinking of salt waters, or rather oceans, seas, in their relation to lands, grounds, landscapes, fields, territory. And I kept questioning myself around all those waters that are in a way or another entangled with the English Empire, so to speak, the Western Empire, and us, with what and whom this Western Empire defines as people, we use salt waters as a medium to get free from the laws of the land. So to speak, I started studying pirates. And pirates who actually lived in those waters to revolutionize the jurisdictions, the modes of conceptualizing, representing the bodies, the dwelling, the way we relate each other. So I will talk about maybe this is where my research, both artistic and academic, positions itself. I call it pirate dramaturgy. To introduce this concept, I would love to attempt the word piracy, pirate, comes from the Greek pairon, which means attempt, which means undertake, which means experiment. So I would like to understand and what I define as a pirate mode of looking. This concept of mode of looking is an expression that we use in dramaturgical studies, just to imagine a thinking through practicing, so a way of looking at something in the very act of its making, in its happening while thinking, and its thinking while happening. So I'm really sorry that my body is not there, and so I'm trying to understand how can I speak about salt water in front of a screen that actually reproduce myself at the same time. And so it's how do we witness this water without being into and with the water? And so how do we think through it? That is to say, for me, how do we become pirates without sailing? And this is where my pirate dramaturgy as an epistemology takes shape. And this epistemology explores how pictures influence the way politics are negotiated or pursued, and how they can stimulate alternative forms of political thinking. So, navigating through pictures, trying to maintain a completely not order that is kind of no progression, trying to stay very disordered. And I'll share my screen okay. I will be back and forth to this with this screen. Yes. I would love to try at least to create this thinking with the screen and thinking through doing rather than order, rather than being in a vertical hierarchy or in the movement. I would love to try the movement. So it will be a little chaotic, and that's the point. And I want to start with this one that I think now. Okay, so this one, this picture is an illustration of 1915. Represents the concept of mare liberum by Hugo Grotius. We actually in the 1605, so basically 17th century. It was the first thinker who actually argued that salt waters cannot be owned, cannot be enclosed, that basically are free. This illustration that, of course, once again, the North American, the United States flag, and then all the other flags, that represent actually what is important to me here is that this illustration is entitled "Freedom of the Seas," like if, or as if, freedom meant a collective engagement of all the states, of all the nations. And what is interesting is that the very concept of freedom is tied to the main symbol of the nation state. So the myths of the nation state in the Western world belong precisely to the modern period in which the French Revolution dictated its laws, the birth, so to speak, of Western political epistemology, the framework through which we understand not only freedom but also the very concept of revolution. And next to this, no. I'm sorry, I will take a little time for doing this because I'm trying to do this. Okay. Next to this, I want to show you this one that is in the. It's an edition. It's like the cover of the general history of the pirates. When I talk about piracy, I often refer to the golden age of piracy. So we are 1720, 1725, this kind of period. I just want to show this one. And to invite you to look at the body of the female, of the woman. This brave-breasted woman, militant, armed with a sword, a torch. That under this there is a Jolly Roger. The Jolly Roger is the flag, is the transnational flag of piracy. And okay, I think now you see all my screen, right? So, and this is the other one. I will not go into this, but I just want to show you this is the Delacroix Liberty leading the people, and is one of the images that actually built and constitutes the social imaginary of revolution. Once again, anchored to the concept of the nation, which in English is named liberty instead of freedom. So, and it's once again anchored to the national and terrestrial, and the differences within the two bodies. So I'm keeping asking myself, what would have happened if instead of building an entire world split into lands with the perfect or idealized bodies to be made into properties with proper names, proper laws. We had spoken of an anonymous and anti-authoritarian pirates flying no-nation flags across the seas. What could still happen if we recovered that setting that was originally maritime, fluctuating, elusive, ungovernable? Here. So I decided to talk and to name this little speech, The Joy of Being Many. The joy of being many comes from another meeting that happened that is named The Art of Being Many. And I will not focus on the many. I would love to focus more on the joy and on the idea of what are we witnessing? Like, how can we witness today when we talk about water, when we talk about pirates, because what now the concept of piracy is used everywhere in different ways, and so we are here right now. There is this one of the big narratives about piracy of today, of these days. Is what is happening with the global symposium flotilla, Trump and Netanyahu. That we don't really know exactly what we are defining with piracy. At the same time, we have also this. This is the other flag, intended as a symbol of liberation. All of that. So all of that, all of that to talk about what I was very happy when Laura invited me, because I was thinking, okay, what does it mean witnessing? What is this role of testimony? What does it mean that the task of art is or the politics consists in something that testifying what cannot yet be put into phrases? So the testimony becomes the only language with which we can say what cannot be said. And to bear witness is the only idiom it is possible to speak and to invent there where proof, arbitration, negotiation are failing. This idea of witnessing, with this, I would love just, and then I think I will close on this. I would love to show you a little of the collective. It's not this one. I will go randomly through these pictures and photos who are actually describing Salmastra. Salmastra is literally brackish. It's an interdisciplinary association based in Catania, in Sicily, so in the Mediterranean, and in the small harbor of San Giovanni Licuti. San Giovanni Licuti, that is this place behind the boat, so the land, is the first and free still accessible point of entry to the sea. It took shape, Salmastra took shape in 2022 from people who were from Sicily and then went away and then came back and then went away, like everyone who lives in an island at some point needs to struggle with this need of going back and forward. And we name it brackish because there is a meeting between fresh water and salt water in the harbor, and this creates a kind of environment that is that has been changing in the years. And we are basically work with fishermen communities and artists and research, trying to create a local, trying to welcome different ages, different events. And we curate this, it's kind of a mixing practicing and knowledge is ancient and recent through the waters, not just through the waters. When you talk with fishermen, or when you talk with someone who actually lives and the survival of his life depends on the sea, you just realize how we are very land-centric based. And so it's this kind of we try to do this to multiply a little. And so etymologically, dramaturgy means working on actions and working on collective actions, and therefore working on pirate actions. I love how in English working on signals something that is still in progress. So how do we collectively work toward the pirate actions? What does it mean to work that is not merely labor? What does pirate mean when we don't refer to a criminal or terrorist? What does action mean? That is not just a performance. What does collectively mean? That it's not just one person thinking. And so these questions, I try to leave them open. And I thank you for the time and for this. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Bruna. It was really wonderful to hear about pirate dramaturgy and learn more about your research and your community practice. Next, we have Julie Patarin-Jossec. And Julie holds a PhD in sociology from the University of Bordeaux and is visiting assistant professor at DePaul University. She mostly teaches on gender, the environment, and photography. She is co-editor of Visual Studies with Taylor and Francis, founding co-editors of Ecographies, Journal of Sound Ethnography, and curator for the International Visual Sociology Association. Her current research explores queer research methods through curation and video art, alongside her ethnographic fieldwork on sea extraction. Welcome, Julie, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Laura, for this invitation. I wish I could be there with you in person, but I'm in cold, weird Chicago. The weather has been so gross. Anyway, I am so glad to be with all of you, and I learned already so much about people and works that are extremely inspiring and have a lot of connections with what I'm interested in. This is so cool. And yeah, I met Laura a few years ago as well, with my colleague from Visual Studies and friend Kate Korak, who is also in the Zoom room. Kate and I interviewed Laura in 2023 about her work and her exhibition. From 2023, I was wearing golden clamshell earrings for publication in Visual Studies. Sirens, sorry. So my background is in sociology, and I work a lot with experimental film and performance and sound. In 2022, I started a new ethnographic fieldwork with commercial divers. I'm going to show you very briefly a few photos, just so you have a better sense of what it looks like in terms of equipment and kind of work, slightly different from scuba diving. And commercial diving is mostly underwater construction work, including welding, which is going to be one of my focuses today, but that's the kind of equipment we have. So heavy helmet and its air surface supplied through an umbilical. And I was mentioning underwater construction work. So for instance, it's about moving block of cement, as you can see on the photo on the right here. The point is that everything in underwater construction works is relatively damaging for local ecosystems, obviously. But what is interesting is that these kind of activities are not defined as forms of environmental violence, according to Western patriarchal capitalist ecologies, which is what I'm interested in. So on the right, you can see this is the welding equipment that commercial divers use, which is on the surface, and then you have the cable connected to the torch that you can see here. And then the diver is in the water connected to the umbilical and the cable. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen just for a few minutes, and we'll go back to share video a bit later. I'm gonna start by reading you some ethnographic fieldwork notes from when I was doing this fieldwork with commercial divers. And that was kind of the starting point for me to think about environmental and queer, gender-based violence. Fishes, barracuda, wrasses, sea breams, anchovies, tunas, groupers, plants, algae, weeds, cnidarium, corals, jellyfishes, echinoderms, sea cucumbers, starfishes, sea urchins, mollusks, winkles, fan mussels, oysters, decapods, shrimps, lobsters, crabs, cephalopods, octopus, squid, plankton. There is not a single particle of the undersea that does not host life. But what about non-animals that are part of the subaquatic ecosystem, such as the mud of a river's seafloor, which itself consists of a plurality of microorganisms? How would considering these non-humans as a form of life with the exact same cognitive status than fishes or humans redefine the extractive industries, but also the work of divers and marine geologists? If indigenous ecologists talk about spirits and deities hosted in rocks, sand grains, and deserted shells, how does their extraction and alteration qualify as damageable? Isn't defining what constitutes violence and what does not a form of violence in itself? So this was from my notebook from July 2023 in the Côte d'Azur, so Mediterranean Sea coast in France. And this is how I got interested in geology, and especially queer geology, because mineral, including marine mineral, defies how Western science defines life as much as marine mineral is economically vital for modern industries. Deep sea mining, for instance, allows the extraction of minerals such as manganese, lithium, cobalt, nickel, used for the manufacture of solar panels and electric car batteries. The first reason for why mineral life challenges Western scientific conceptions is that mineral does not fit our Western science perceives a liveliness. Life, as understood in Western science, is based on human perceptions of the world. They are anthropocentric, which tend to define life according to human characteristics by definition, such as feeling pain and having the ability to verbalize this pain. As a consequence, Western science considers mineral as insensate and immobile matter, which in turn challenges how we as humans understand the agency of this matter. If a rock is not alive, does not move, nor does it have any form of consciousness as understood by Western reason, mineral cannot, by definition, have agency, and the right to exist only belongs to life with a voice and the ability to feel. As emphasized in indigenous, Black, queer, and environmental studies, representations of the world that shape Western science mostly result from distinctions between living and dead, human, non-human, animate, inanimate, because distinctions engender otherness. Otherness engenders hierarchies amongst living things, what we refer to with the concept of speciesism. And I work a lot with, obviously, a lot of authors, including Dana Luciano, who writes about how geology as a science, quote, participated in the process of organizing bodies in relation to geological and biological substance, settled aliveness as we know it, unquote, and conceptualized geologic matter as inhuman and inanimate. And Dana Luciano works from a perspective of Black geology. And those definitions create a space to speculate about otherness, where geological science emerged in the midst of colonial land dispossession and slavery. So from that perspective, the queer geology emphasizes how not only gender and sexuality, but also race and ability infuse those distinctions between the human and the non-human, facilitating the exploitation and the commodification of the non-human, including sea minerals. Queer theories of the environment rely on the idea that nature does not express itself in those binary and distinctive ways, but rather expresses how human and non-human are inextricably linked and coexisting, which has been very extensively discussed by a lot of scholars, including Donna Haraway. Queer environmental theory also reflects on how ideas, spaces, and practices designated as nature are often vigorously defended against queers in a society in which that very nature is increasingly degraded and exploited. So this is my connection between gender violence against queer bodies and violence against non-humans, including how we can understand sea mineral extraction at different scales, including small samples, or the mess that welding does in the water, like how that constitutes a form of environmental violence against mineral life. Queer ecologies understand oppressed humans, working class individuals, people of color, queer bodies, and oppressed non-humans, degraded landscapes, threatened natural resources, and other flora and fauna to be deeply interconnected. And that's a very strong argument developed in queer environmental theory, especially by Seymour, whose first name I forgot, but I can send you all my references if you're interested as well. So there is this idea of promoting politicized advocacy on behalf of both queer and non-human bodies as part of this like dual violence. This led me to the work I want to focus on today, which is a film part of the exhibition. If you're in person in Montreal, I'm gonna screen the film for those of you who are online, mostly without the sound, so that I can keep talking in the meantime. But it's a film from a series I started in a residency at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington in 2024, titled I Hear the Quivering of That Flame. Just a sec, the time that I share my screen again. So I was mentioning that so commercial diving is mostly underwater construction work, and like other sectors of like construction related occupations, commercial diving is a highly masculine profession, predominantly masculine. At the time I was doing the training myself to become a commercial diver, because that was part of my research process as an ethnographer. That was in France, and out of 1,500 commercial divers, about 10, 11 were women. As far as I know, none of those were like non-binary or identifying as neither man or woman. And I think this number is slightly lower right now. So very small proportion of women, and because of like, for a lot of reasons, this is an activity and an occupation that encapsulates a lot of like expression of traditional masculinity through the exercise of physical strength, for instance, again, as you can find in non-underwater construction work as well. And as a result of that, it's a very machist sector of activity with, at least in my own experience, a lot of gender-based violence and assaults relatively commonly, and that was the case in my fieldwork. So I was interested in trying to understand the discomfort I had as a commercial diver in training in terms of my impact on underwater ecosystems, and also linking that to the gender-based violences I was experiencing in my research from other commercial divers. I'm going to show you, I'm going to start playing the video, and I will let you just listen the first like couple of minutes so you can have an idea of the soundscape. And then I cut the sound and further explain what the film is about.
Where what lies below the ground, from the edge of the ledges, I hear you trembling, I hear you trembling, I feel you echoing, I feel you, that drilling heat, that drilling heat, the storm of air, the storm of air.
The sound seems pretty low, but it's a soundscape that is a superposition of voices, distorted voices. So it's a film I shot as part of a residency I was mentioning. It includes footage from 2 performances. The footage you can see on the right, it's a live performance I did during my residency at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And the footage on the left is a performance I did that same day, but in my hotel room, because I was not allowed to tattoo myself in, like on campus for like legislation, like health reasons. The footage in the middle is from the live performance. I like to use a lot of like glitchy cameras. I work a lot with Jack Halberstam called illegible images. So the idea with this performance was to reproduce, using tattooing, the forms used in commercial divers welding training. We use a square, a circle, and a triangle, and the goal is to try to like train yourself to reproduce those shapes as clearly and cleanly as you can with the welding torch. So 2 performances, and in both cases I tattooed those 3 shapes from the welding training, and substituting the welding torch for a tattoo pen, tattooing my skin instead of welding underwater was the visual language that I developed to think both my impact on underwater ecosystems as a diver, especially in the case of welding practice, and the mutual violence experienced by non-human and queer bodies in Western androcentric ecologies. Tattooing my skin instead of perpetuating environmental damage as caused by welding on undersea non-humans was so the idea. I could have used a lot of different illustrative techniques based on painting or drawing to replace the welding torch for a performance. And the reason I worked with tattooing is for the role of this medium in queer theory, contemporary queer communities, and also multi-species practice. Tattoos can be understood as destabilizing normative regimes of the body and identity as it functions as a technique of self-inscription through which subjects perform and modify the body beyond dominant social codes. And so centering this performance on tattooing echoed also multi-species practice for the composition and symbolic value of ink. In all my films and performances, I work a lot with around the agency of aquatic more than humans. Another series I worked on since 2023 called Nautica centers around the destruction of an humming Nautica Super 8 camera, mostly using seawater and sediments. I also do a lot of experimental, sustainable photography using sediments and seawater or water from the Lake Michigan in processing. But tattoo inks have long been composed of animal and mineral-derived substances like bone char, shellac from insects, glycerin that may be animal-based, alongside plant and synthetic pigments. So the toxicological and ecological compositions of ink, including heavy metals and industrial compounds that circulate between bodies, environments, and infrastructures, can also be conceptualized as multi-species. Once injected, tattoo ink becomes part of an interspecies entanglement involving human skin, immune responses, microbial life, and pigment particles that migrate through the body. From that theoretical angle, tattooing can be conceptualized as a multi-species practice of bodily inscription co-produced by human and non-human matter, materials, organisms, and chemical agents, which is something closely related to what Donna Haraway and Annette Sink write about when they talk about multi-species entanglement or collaborations. The voiceover and soundscape for this film is based on a poem that I wrote for that performance. It's a poem based on a conversation I imagined with the metallic plate used for welding. So it's a conversation centered on the idea of trembling, quivering, which relate to some of the physical reactions that assaulted bodies, human and non-human, can experience after an assault. And I use a lot of personification language about the metal plaque. In the poem, I purposely ask the plaque how it feels, what it hears, what it sees, as a direct dialogue with how Western ecologies use these abilities to differentiate what is alive and conscious and what is not. I'm gonna end by reading. So those are the three shapes used for the welding training. And I'm gonna end by reading the poem, and I would like to ask you to, if you can, close your eyes while I read and imagine a plaque of metal being burned by a welding torch. So the torch produces smoke all around the plaque, all around you, to the point you can't see anything. You can discern the flame, and the tides in the water makes the plaque and the torch and the flame move in waves. So there is an intertwinement of these movements and paces, the fast trembling, bursting flame, and the slower motion of the waves, the tides in the water. I hear the quivering of that flame. Where what lies below the ground from the edge of the ledges. I hear you trembling. I feel you echoing. That drilling heat, that storm of air. Can you discern yourself in that mud, that fire? How does it feel? How does it feel? You howl and I shiver. This drilling heat that fixes you there. You taste like blood. Where would it come from? I hear the quivering of that flame. I still hear it. I can still hear it. Who is being burned? Who is being rattled? Who talks? Who receives? Does the change of pace matter? Would it be the same? Dry? I hear the quivering of that flame. Beneath my nails, above my waist, there's drilling heat that fixes you there. How does it feel? How does it feel? A cloud of estranged shades buries everything in the shadows and the sand. Your hauling, my shivering. I still hear the quivering of that flame. And I thank you very much for your attention. Could you hear everything okay? Like the sound of the video was super low, but okay. Cool.
Yes, yes, thank you so much, Julie. That was such a nice experience to close our eyes and listen to the poem. So many different, like multiple modes of communication and sharing research. Thank you. So we have one more presentation online before we come back to in person. So next up is Ellie Schmidt, who is a visual artist and filmmaker living between Los Angeles, California and Sitka, Alaska. Through art practice, free diving and fishing, Ellie explores social, ecological, and physical sites of exchange of Pacific coastlines through film, swimming, boating, and love stories. She is interested in developing new vocabularies for considering mutual exchanges, hunting, eating, freediving, osmosis, that define contemporary relationships between humans and wild places, especially in Southeast Alaska and Southern California. In the context of widespread ecological damage, how can arts practice lead us towards a more enmeshed and reciprocal relationship with the world? She uses documentary films, poems, creative nonfiction, and interactive installation to ask what different types of interfaces, romantic attachment, substance, cutting fish, can teach us about these landscapes of love and loss. Thank you so much, Ellie, for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Laura, for that introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, let me know if anything looks weird. Yeah, so I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me at this event. I think all the talks so far have been really interesting and wonderful and very inspiring. So just happy to be here. So my name is Ellie Schmidt. I'm a visual artist and filmmaker. I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And as Laura said, when I'm not in Los Angeles, I spend time in the summers in Alaska. My art practice includes documentary film, underwater photography, installation, sculpture, and some writings. And my work addresses stories of subsistence fishing, fishing experience, regeneration and conservation, and swimming. I'm interested in this idea of sites of exchange where two bodies or entities come into contact with each other and transform each other. I think of a coastline as an example of a site of exchange, as well as the interface between a fish and a fisherman, a swimmer and the water, and between people in a romantic or platonic relationship. So this year I came across an essay by Samantha Saville called Towards Humble Geographies. And Saville presents a collection of research practices that she calls humble geography. So, a humble geography embraces being part of the world rather than its master. It is open to being affected by objects and beings, and to the different limitations, knowledges, relations, and identities that openness can bring. A humble researcher is willing to tell backstories, hold theories and research goals in proxy, and embrace the accompanying mess and failures. I really resonated with this essay overall, and I thought it fit really well with the theme of this symposium. Seville's concept of humble geography advocates for an embodied, situated mode of researching. Seville places emphasis on relating to a place, communities, other people, and non-humans. I appreciate how Seville encourages researchers to embrace a mindset of openness, which can help us drive our attention outwards instead of inwards, and allow ourselves to be transformed by our environment and by the other actors that we come into contact with. Another key element of Seville's proposal is to always act with gentleness. Swimming in the ocean, as I'm sure you've experienced, can be a very humbling experience. As creatures grown accustomed to living comfortable lives in built environments built for us, it can be shocking to experience the complete paradigm shift of being in the ocean. We move from being an upright creature to a horizontal creature. The colors change, the rules of gravity change. I find swimming and art making in the water to place me in a very humbling environment where if I am to succeed at anything, I need to accept a new, watery way of being. For over a decade, I have practiced making observations underwater, mostly video and photography, but using increasingly more complex and expensive forms of technology. Underwater cameras, camera housings, hydrophones have all helped me tell stories that take place underwater. But sometimes I find underwater cameras to be limiting. Not only are they prohibitively expensive, but they also have a very specific kind of aesthetic. Underwater media is headed in the same kind of aesthetic direction, hyper-stabilized, beautifully colored, clear, in sharp focus. Underwater filming technology is concentrated to a small number of not only specific brands of cameras, but also highly prized models, lenses, and even famous dive sites. I've felt that this unifying aesthetic of underwater media does a disservice to the complicated and shifting ecologies of the kelp forest in California. Although I'm grateful for these photographs and videos of the California kelp forest, I feel they represent a kind of aesthetic stuckness which flattens our understanding of these places. I would argue that underwater media in California needs to move away from mimicking famous underwater aesthetics and towards a more humble origin, with an ethos for the spaces of in-between, as Seville puts it. The ocean can be dark, murky, disorienting, even sickening. Our experience when immersed in the ocean is mediated by our bodies. I would argue for more rough and tumble videography, more depictions of non-charismatic algae and animals, and a wider variety of perspectives and voices depicting landscapes like the kelp forest. A year ago, I started thinking about the observational painting classes that I took as a teenager. After a decade of working with underwater cameras, I was curious about bringing more simple tools underwater. I was inspired by John Kilduff's TV show, Let's Paint TV, in which he paints running on a treadmill, biking, cooking food, playing ping pong, etc. So I bought this water-resistant notebook, which is the brand Right in the Rain, and I started experimenting with bringing my drawings underwater as a way to explore a more humble, embodied kind of observation. My first drawings were in Hawaii, and you can see that they're very tentative. It was really like learning to draw all over again and learning to see all over again. For some of these drawings, I practiced drawing them using one breath, so diving down and drawing while holding my breath. And some of these drawings are made floating at the surface. This past year, I took my drawing practice into the kelp forests of California, where the kelp forests are very beautiful but very precarious also. I think that drawing underwater provides a great opportunity to practice a kind of humble geography. Swimming is messy, seeing underwater is messy. The humility of trying to sketch underwater reminds me to have an open mind, reminds me to experiment and play, and reminds me to accept failure. In particular, I've had to embrace drawing things that are actively moving. Underwater, most of the living matter is in constant movement, so it's almost like my pace of observation has to completely change. I recently started documenting my drawings with a GoPro camera strapped to my chest, which adds a new element of sharing the process in addition to the drawings themselves. And these pictures are of the notebook out of the water, but it's completely saturated. And I really love how in this state you can see through the pages to the other drawings. So it becomes kind of a translucent drawing surface. I also found myself drawing the same species of fish over and over again in a kind of anatomical or movement study, which was really interesting and satisfying. So these are Garibaldi, the state fish of California. This was drawing on a day when it was too murky to draw underwater, so I'm just drawing in the water, but above the surface. This is a drawing in a tide pool that was getting hit by the surge, so it was a very active kind of drawing of these anemones and sea urchins. This is stone paper, which is a kind of plastic paper, which is a new method that I'm trying. It allows for more kind of blending of the pencil. And so I'm excited to see where this process will lead. It still feels very initial and kind of experimental at this point, but I'm interested to keep pushing it and exploring. One thing I wanted to say also about this practice is drawing underwater and in the water has helped me spend more time in the water at a slower pace than I would normally spend. And so it allows me to, I notice that I see a lot more things when I'm out there. And I don't know if it's because I'm more still or because I have a calmer attitude, but I feel like the fish and the wildlife are a little bit less spooky when I'm drawing, and it just helps me put in more hours out there. And finally, I wanted to say that I believe strongly that witnessing and attention are not luxuries, but they are precursors to care and responsibility. And so the more we can foster them and attend to them, I think we can further develop our compassionate relationship with the natural world. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Ellie. It's wonderful to see so many drawings, and I have so many questions. Looking forward to talking in the discussion. And now we are moving back into this space, and we have our last panel presentation by Fenyx Florentiny. And Fenyx is a Martinican visual artist currently pursuing a master's degree at UQAM. Their hybrid practice, rooted in both Martinique and Quebec, draws inspiration from queer, decolonial, and ecofeminist thought. They create sensory ecosystems where the body becomes a site of archives, rituals, and reappropriation. Assemblage, contamination, failure, and care guide their transdisciplinary research, blending performance, experimentation, sound, and video. Their practice explores margins, interstices, and borders as fertile ground for creation, transforming the exhibition space into a shared experiential terrain. Thank you so much, Fenyx, for being here today. Take it away. Of course, yeah.
First, I would like to invite everyone to stand up and take one of the artifacts in the box, play with it, and then pass it to someone else. And also, you don't have to be seated during my presentation. You can move around.
So mysterious.
I come from the bottom of the sea. L'eau, archive vivante. Mon corps, archive vivante. Dancing together, telling stories, too loud to be spoken. Trouble pour eux, disorientating, questioning verticality. Un fragment, puis un fragment, puis un fragment se contaminant l'un l'autre, dripping on the soil of unspoken history. Summoning earth and sky, ancestry and spirituality. The ocean is not merely a backdrop for memory, but an active archive, saturated with traces impossible to retrace, where the absent continue to haunt the waters. In this way, it nourishes my own vision of the Atlantic as bearer of infungible narratives, made of absences, drifts, and intangible traces. Cells. Peggy Pierrot theorizes that water retains the memory of cells. Ocean water is constantly recycled. The water of millennia ago is the water of today. The water I swim in is the same water my ancestors swam in. The Atlantic Ocean therefore carries the memories and cells of my vanished ancestors. Perhaps some of them were queer, transformed. Water operates in a closed circuit that has remained the same for billions of years. Seawater evaporates into the atmosphere under the influence of the sun's heat. It then forms clouds that move under the influence of the winds. Aided by gravity, the droplets that make up the clouds become heavier and fall back to the ground as precipitation or fog. This rainwater will replenish the underground aquifers, which will then feed the streams, which in turn flow into the sea. And so, from sea to sky, from sky to earth, and from earth to sea, the water's journey begins again, endlessly. To rub, to caress a surface until it's transformed. Hollow, the empty space between my ribs where your name sings, even if I don't recognize the word. Janvier 2024, plage de la Pointe Fola. Pieces by pieces, I build you an altar. I pick everything that call onto me, rocks, a G, pieces of words, and arrange them trying not to think about the aesthetics of it. And with every piece I have, I build you. I'm building an altar, and that altar is your body, and I kneel before it in hopes you will come whisper at my ear. What would you say to me? If water carries memories and beings from immemorial times, if my skin is porous, it means me and the water are one. It means I swim in the midst of my ancestors and my descendants. What can I learn? What can I learn from them? What can I access that was held by my ancestors, and what do I leave behind me? Don't forget, there is Ellie a Waterloo, so how could there not be an Ellie who pushes us to tap into the cosmic power of our own bodily fluids, the water that daily comes from between our thighs? Convoquer le corps. My pieces are wet, flowing, messy fragments. They speak an undecipherable language that nonetheless sets bodies and emotion in motion. They carry a zigzagging, slippery memory that blurs overly clear boundaries. My methodology is a methodology of waters, of the mangrove, the river, the depth of the Atlantic Ocean, stagnant water, sea mucus, and the abyss. It seeps into fissures to provoke a tremor. It conceives of itself as an embodied epistemology, a relational aesthetic, and a politics of opacity. At the heart of my methodology lies the body, the moving body, the body that rubs against the land, the body as archive, the body that thinks, bodies. My body, their bodies, human and non-human bodies, living and non-living. Entre ces corps circule la matière, dense, compressible, mouvante. Des corps poreux qui fuient et se contaminent. When I engage with the territories I traverse and that traverse me and become like seaweed, mucus, mud, or silt, it's with a desire for sensory archiving. What can I learn from a connection that books or conversation can teach me? How can I let my body take precedence over my brain to learn and understand outside of normative systems of thought? Somatic practices burst into my studio during a block experience at the beginning of my research process. I wanted to decolonize queer, nothing less. To create a working methodology that would be queer and deeply rooted in the Caribbean. So I read and thought and wrote, and I went around in circles. Then I went to Big National Park in Rimouski, and my body took over. My hands in the bladder rack, my feet on the rock, the cold air in my nostrils and the fog in the distance. I felt there. I felt alive. I felt like my gender had no importance, that nature could hold my entire being without question. Yeah. Somatic practices allow me to embrace a situated methodology rooted in queer, feminist, and Caribbean epistemologies, to reconcile what I then saw as a rupture because between my Caribbeanness and my queerness, I had no choice but to involve my body, since that's where the divide lived. But why seek answers in white queer thoughts, methods, and knowledges when these fail to speak to me? What's the point of attaching definitions that make no sense on the territory I walk? It was with Tinsley and Diazeles that I began to imagine a diasporic queer being, tentacles anchored in sand and indigestible by the colonial matrix. Thinking from my body, racialized Caribbean mothering fat gives me access to undisciplined epistemologies that bloom outside colonial constraints. By letting myself traversed by other bodies of water, I create networks of meaning, memory, and unstoppable affect, and fungible ones that carry with them a potential for disruption. My favorite body to dialogue with, the sea. Water seems more rhizomatic to me than any root. It irrigates without processing, connects without confining, it infiltrates. Like Gleason's rhizome, it makes possible a poetics of relation. As matter in perpetual transformation, ungovernable and enveloping, it embodies a feminist ethic of care and vulnerability. In this context, the immersed body becomes a critical tool against fixed boundaries like those of gender, race, or temporality. Water reveals its liberating potential for queer bodies. The ocean blurs boundary but also contours. It demands that humans release the certainties of their terrestrial existence, horizontality, and reduced color spectrums become diffracted. So many possibilities for letting ourselves become disoriented. What if the ocean were the home of queer Caribbeans? Thinking of ourselves as bodies of water compels us to place our relationship to other bodies of water at the center of our attention. In doing so, we move closer to an embodied ethic of care, a potential remedy against the individualism that governs many of our societies. If my existence only acquires meaning through contact with another as porous as myself, then this self ceases to be a fixed and unalterable entity and is shaped by contact, contamination, and interpenetration. All these moving bodies then form an opaque network of relationships that are fluidly formed and dissolved. My body is an ecosystem where past and present, living and non-living, my ancestors and descendants coexist. My body contains multitudes, my microbiome, the collection of microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, fungi that live on my skin or in my stomach, blurs the boundaries between inside and outside. It challenges the categories of the human and questions individuality. It thwarts essential logic, because if my microbiome changes with what I eat, what I touch, where I live, then my identity is constantly evolving. A complexity difficult to grab. My genealogy is not limited to blood. It extends to algae, lichen, my chosen family, and marine animals. I claim a queer kinship, a chosen, embodied, transversal kinship. My lineage forges its path through water and mud. It is there that I seek my queer ancestors, not in archives, but in currents, flows, and matter. Being does not exist before relationship. Entities emerge together in a process of interaction. Thus, my body is not a fixed place, but a relational event in becoming. It is composed of microbes, memories, spiritualities, and waste. It is a living palimpsest where wrongs, desires, and lacks are inscribed. To think from my body is to think from my kinships. The concept of acquampamiento, championed by Latin American decolonial activists, expresses this idea to carry the struggle within one's own body, but within a multiple, interconnected, insurgent body to be traversed, to allow oneself to be affected, to dance with the untouchable. Martinique. I am surrounded by sargassum seaweed. The water is waist deep. I look to the horizon and see only an endless mass of trout brown. There is no escape. The seaweed scratches my skin with every step I take. I struggle to move forward. I'm stuck in the middle of a brown tide. I'm part of it now. I feel this new floating territory tightening around me. Its branches dig into my skin more and more and more until they break through the barrier. They penetrate my flesh, make their way around my bones into my organs. I'm part of it and it's part of me. I become algae, sargassum, and as sargassum, I drift away, drift towards north, east, west, south, rootless, homeless, but full of life, home to those who forgot the name. Et pendant que sargassum colonise nos cellules, activant une lente mais inéluctable mutation, I soften my borders, my skin, viscous my skin, porous my skin, dissolving, becoming food for my kin, becoming other. What am I made of? De quoi suis-je fait? Ma langue, a soft mollusk, a skin that grows lichen. My belly, a soft sponge, coral breaking the skin of my back, my hips, my thighs, hiding spaces for fishes, insects, birds, tender rumbling of my heart. An endless love song, eyes closed, skin interfere. Outside in, inside out. Walks, barks, bubbles exploding under tongue, lung, mouth, with water flowing, watering, mothering. Et ainsi, je deviens agent de contamination. 3 pistoles. Je me sens me diffracter dans l'immensité de l'espace quand j'ai juste besoin de m'écraser dans le sol et mourir un peu. Ma peau bourdonne, mes organes veulent se faire la malle et explorer chaque recoin, chaud, sombre, froid, lumineux, ne rien laisser dans l'opacité. Mais ma peau résiste, plus élastique d'avoir été trop tirée, elle menace de se rompre et je fige. Breathless, enfermé dans le bruit sourd de mes battements de corps, too loud, I need softness. Je veux m'enfuir dans le silence, marcher dans la vase, ralentir mon rythme cardiaque, homéostasie. My body belongs to the fleuve, but this is not my body. My body belongs to un autre espace-temps. Only that skin is mine. J'ai perdu mon dedans sur le bord d'une route, à prendre la poussière. Is my skin too small? Ou mon univers trop grand, incompressible, voué à s'expandre jusqu'à disparaître. Is my body mine? Et mes viscères qui s'amalgament au goudron n'oublient pas d'où elles viennent. Et bientôt, croissent, lichen et mousse, nourris par mon sang, a nest for all beings, dansant au rythme de tes os. Voilà.
Thank you so much, Fenyx. And thank you to all the presenters. So many crossovers and interesting points of connection. We're going to take a break for maybe 10 minutes, and we'll come back and then have about 25 or 20 minutes for conversation. Help yourself to coffee and any food that's left, and stretch, and we'll see you back.
It's sweet sometimes to just, try new things.
Off this thing, I beg. You know, no.
Chama carry that room.
We can get started. Okay. Maybe you can make an announcement and.
Okay, Jax, welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. Everyone wants to find their seats, and those of you on Zoom, get comfortable.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I don't know are we able to see our panelists online? Hi, friends online. So we have until 1 to have a conversation about these amazing presentations, amazing work, amazing practices, and I guess I just want to open up this space by first just noting some of the themes that I witnessed when everyone was talking. And because we have only about 20 minutes to talk, I want to open it up right away for the audience to ask questions and also for panelists to ask questions of one another. So the themes that I noticed were collectivity, multi-species, ecologies, kinship, poetry. So many people are using poetry. And beyond poetry, art and multimodal mixed research methods and creation methods. So there's something here about ecologies of practices, ecologies of media. Mess and failure. So water kind of allowing us to think about the interconnectivity between things. And thinking to Ellie's presentation about being in water, being submerged, being tossed and turned through the drawing practice. Be like kind of wrestling with what it means to have like water impact on us. Bringing our whole selves and histories into our work. This came up in many presentations about bringing our former selves, bringing different aspects of our own journeys as makers and thinkers and people into the work, adapting to circumstances, ethics of care against individualism, and living processes, not fixed, transformation. So these are just some of the kinds of keywords that resonated with me throughout the presentations. And I want to open it up maybe first to see if a panelist wants to ask another panelist a question. Anyone have a desire to get the conversation started? What about from the audience, either online or in person? Okay, we have someone from the audience. We'll bring a mic over.
I'll just bring a mic over for you, Janemi. Yep.
Okay, thank you. I just really have appreciated this very much, and I have pages of notes, but what I think is a symbol for me is the quote from the gun from Chekhov, and that a symbol can emerge and then has to be used. And then the other thing for me, just with other quotes, is the embodied witness. I think this is an element for all of us right now in the world, and seeing the ship with the flag of ownership in 1609 or something was really a lesson. I just so appreciate the links that have been made with the water and the history and our responsibility as embodied witnesses at this moment in time. That's my comment.
Thank you so much. Other questions?
There was a question, Laura, that came in via Zoom, and I can read that out from
Yes,
Ayana.
please.
Ayana would love to hear everyone share their first memory in or with water. And they're curious about how our embodied memories and relationship to water have come to shape what we theorize as being and becoming within our scholarship and art practices.
It's a good question of just because I feel like a lot of folks are trying to articulate essentially this weird combination of water as an entity that has agency, water as a creative collaborator, and water as a community member, a lot of folks. But I think I really appreciated the articulation of sometimes water being murky and scary, because the first memory that shot into my brain with the question was not my first memory with water, which I'm I think that might have been dancing on a beach with my sister. I grew up in San Francisco, which that sounds really lovely. But the first thing that came to my mind was falling into the Napa River at age 12 and feeling really panicked and like I was gonna drown and die. But I think that sort of duality speaks to the importance of water, that it is this very powerful presence that we are utterly dependent on, that has its own communities and agendas and needs and necessary paths through the world, that need to be reckoned with. And that some folks come up in cultures where there's deeper entanglements, and some folks, cultivate that relationship later. Maybe, but but I think it's a solid question, because there is a point at which I'm so utterly respectful of everyone's engagements with water, and also keenly aware that if water were to disappear at any point in time, or become untenable, we would all be fucked. It's cute that we're yeah, water's beautiful, and it's in our bodies, and it's everywhere. And also, if it decided to peace out at any point, then we would be done. So I don't know. I feel like it's a very it's a tenuous relationship for me personally.
Do some of the people online want to talk?
Thank you for the question. I would love to say something more. It's amazing how the relationship with the water is always changing, and I keep asking which kind of water, because when we talk about water, it could be the salt one, the fresh one, the brackish one. So it's a water intended as resource, because it makes something different than the water that I use as a medium for my practice, for my artistic practice, from the one that I can drink, the one that is free to drink, the one that I need to pay. I don't know what is water. So I think that maybe it's something that we need. I'm very sorry, because I'm very chaotic in my way of thinking, and I feel very much what is happening right now on the Mediterranean waters, and we call the Mediterranean waters just because it's more. There is a big attention on that, but actually it has been for a long period in the history that our relation with waters, now in the last 20 years, maybe because of ecological discourses, we are trying, when I say we, I say all the time the white Western people, so not the, because it depends on the cultures, and there are different kind of relationship with the waters. So I come from Sicily. I'm Sicilian, so I leave the island and the sea in different, in a specific way that is related to be part of the of a land that is surrounded by waters. And if we still think that waters is not a way to create the revolution, I think this will be always what seemed to me that everything that you said, every contribution has a specific power, gives a specific power to water, whatever it is water, but it's this kind of power that is not the land, it's not there. And speaking of poetry, I would just say, I just suggest to everyone, because I don't know if you know this book, that is this, Sailing Without Hub, that is just Steve Mans, who actually is the one who coined this term of blue humanities. It's interesting because it talks about Moby Dick, but with no captain. So what are these people who lives in these boats, or who sails, who stays with the waters? He has a big relationship with swimming. So swimming as a way of thinking and practicing. But there is no captain. So it means that there is no one, just one. And I don't know, I just shut up. But that's I think my relationship with water would be the plurality that it engages all the time. And thank you.
If I could just mention really quickly, yeah, I love this question. I love your guys' responses. I think something that's coming into clarity in my own head right now is I think when I was first introduced to hydrofeminism and ideas of water, it's really easy to think of water as sort of this homogeneous substance around the world. But I think what I'm hearing from you guys spoke about so clearly is like the specificity of different waters and its character and how important it is to be aware of that and to bring that into the conversation. The different characters of water and the different forms it can take, and that it's not this sort of like universal, it's both universal and particular, I guess, which is what Astrida Naimanes says. But yeah, so I just wanted to say thank you guys for all your perspectives. And I love what Fenyx said about how water is more rhizomatic than any types of roots. I thought that was really speaking to what you're saying, Bruna, about the yeah, like the connectivity of water. And then what Mo, you were saying about how water is a community member. I thought that was really beautiful. So yeah, lots of interesting thoughts.
Does anyone else want to share any of their thoughts on I don't remember the original question. First memories of water.
I can follow up with that very quickly as well. I was actually thinking about Astrida Naimanes and Bodies of Water as well, because I read that book, Bodies of Water, for the first time when I was learning scuba diving. And I started to dive. It was kind of out of nowhere. So I was, the years preceding diving, I was a lecturer at this State University of St. Petersburg in Russia. And because of the political climate, that was a few months before the war in Ukraine started, obviously had to leave. And while I was like in the plane going to visit my mother in the south of France, the plane I was landing in Nice because of where the airport is located right before landing. We flew above the Mediterranean Sea and the sun was like reflecting on the waves. And looking at that, I was like, oh, maybe I should try diving. Everyone does that in the summer. You're like, why not? And I had no idea that would become my like work and a passion, I guess. And that first diving experience was kind of like, I don't know, I was seeing the light. It was like mind-blowing, like bodily sensations and the weightlessness, obviously, but also what Melody Drew writes a lot in terms of, yeah, how being in the water eventually changes your, like, impact your positionality and changes how you look at yourself in the world and how you see and think about pretty much everything. But related to Bodies of Water, my first memory of in with water would be, I guess, the water part of my body. Part of hydrofeminism is about like addressing and reflecting on how our corporality connects to water in a lot of different ways, but including through the different fluids that are part of our corporality. And one thing I'm especially interested in, and that was in a lot of presentations in the panel, is the nuance and complexity and collective nature of water from different aspects, from the aspect of multi-species relationality, how water hosted like different organisms, and how, which is very much queer theoretical lens as well, how our body connects to more than human forms of life, because we share microorganisms and foods and bacteria and that stuff, and how you can't really think about your own body as an individual body separated from other forms of life, including from different forms of water.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions from the chat or from the audience? Yes. Sofiane.
Thanks, everyone. I have a very broad question. I'm curious to know if some of you would like to share about co-witnessing with the audience, because I feel like some of you have touched this a little bit, like I think Fenyx with like the experience of like us listening while holding some of your object, and then Ellie, you had the drawing, but also like the GoPros, so like the audience could witness your process. So is there some of you that want to extend on this idea of co-witnessing with the audience? Thank you.
I'm happy. Oh, sorry. No, go ahead, Fenyx. Go ahead.
Co-witnessing is not a word we use in French, but I think it really, I don't know what would be the French for it. I don't think there is a good translation, but from what I understand, it really resonates with my practice and the way I want to do art. I'm always like, this is ridiculous being alone in my studio making objects that I will display in between 4 white walls. And I try to experiment a bit with like involving the bodies of the people visiting my exhibition. Well, the last month, because I had an exhibition on view at Articule, and it was fun, but also it was hard. Like, if I was in the space, it was easy for people to interact with my pieces, smell, touch, carry them, move them around in the space. Like, it was also, I had a sculpture with, comment ça s'appelle? I don't even remember kelp. And it was beautiful seeing people, you know, just closing their eyes and smelling the kelp and being like, oh, it reminds me, blah, 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 ou blah, blah, blah. But, so yeah, I want my art to, there is a movement from me being activated by the territory I visit, and then that's all those like affects get passed to the work I make, and then my dream would be that those affects like rebondir, rebound on the like resonates with the bodies of the people who visit the space. But I think it's like we are so disconnected from our bodies and senses, and also there is a certain like, how do you say, politique is not the word, etiquette to how you're supposed to be into a exhibition space, that like people were amazed that they could touch the work, but I had to like almost harass them so they can touch it. So yeah, now I'm done with exhibitions and I'm thinking more about communauté de pratique. How do you say that? Communauté de pratique. Community practice. Because I think when you involve the bodies, it transforms the thoughts, and then that's how you can really like innovate. Does that answer your question?
Okay, bye.
I just wanted, before Ellie shares, I attended Fenyx's, one of Fenyx's workshops for their gallery, for their exhibition at Articule, and I was so struck by some of the prompts. One of the prompts was encouraging us to adapt the pacing that we moved in the gallery and like almost to run. And like there was so many, I mean, there was also a pond installed in the gallery too, and there was, you know, anyway, it was just really striking because it really drew my attention to that etiquette that you're talking about, the ways that we're kind of expected to move in space and kind of dismantling that. And then Ellie, were you going to share something as well?
Oh, just really quick, but yeah, I wish I could see that exhibit. It sounds amazing. And to include like the smell of kelp as part of an exhibit, that sounds so amazing to me. So I hope I can encounter it sometime. But I wanted to respond to the co-witnessing question. I loved Florencia's the essay you shared about witnessing. I'm definitely excited to steal that and read that. I resonate with a lot of what Fenyx you were saying. I feel like my work, I've tried to make these immersive spaces and just become obsessed with creating more and more immersive space. So I've done like installations and big video projections and VR and put people in like a motorized boat and all these things. But eventually I kind of realized that my work, I'm just trying to take people's attention and trap it and force them to look out of the gallery and into the world. And so it's not my artistic practice, but I have a snorkeling tour company. And I think that bringing people snorkeling is doing exactly what my art sort of dreams of doing, which is putting them in a new environment and helping them build their own relationships with a place. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of hope in my work of sort of bringing people along with me and having them do an experience rather than sharing my experience of it. And so I think the GoPro footage is a little bit preliminary, but I think it would be really fun to share, you know, the materials and the process in a more like come along with me type of way. And I think the goals of the piece would be more aligned with that. But yeah, I really like that question and this question of how to bring art into more of a community practice rather than just like in the gallery space.
Thank you so much, Ellie. And I need to put you and Sofiane in touch because Sofiane is one of the artists in the exhibition and has a drawing practice as well. Drawing is noticing, and you'll be able to, I'll be posting stuff about the exhibition, so you'll be able to follow up there. But we're at time for lunch and to take a break, and I just want to extend like my heartfelt gratitude to everyone on the panel, online and in person. It's been like a tremendous joy to listen to your amazing work, so different from each other and yet so many points of connection. I'm really excited to follow up with all of you. And thank you so much to everyone who's participating in the audience. I invite everyone to enjoy pizza lunch, again with vegan, vegetarian, and gluten-free options. We'll reconvene at 1:30, I believe. Yes, at 1:30. And just before we break, I want to give a little bit of an overview for the afternoon. So at 1:30, we're going to have an amazing talk and experiential offering, a somatic activity led by Danielle K. Garrison, who's a doctoral researcher in dance. And Danielle's going to share her tethering practice and talk about consent in dance. And then afterward, we're going to have another brilliant talk. The keynote, Dr. Ayana Omilari Fluellen, will be joining us, and we'll hear a presentation from Dr. Fluellen, and then again, it's open space for audience to ask Dr. Fluellen about their work. And then after a little break, we'll be able to converse and talk and share in all of the research creation that's in the space. And there's also going to be some online interaction and documentation of the research creation exhibition. So if you are online, you can still experience part of the offerings. So thank you again to the panelists. We'll see you at 1:30.
All right, yeah, thank you so much. So as Laura said, thank you so much to the panelists here and online. Just a quick note that we'll have the Zoom open, but we'll be closing up the live stream, and we'll get back around 1:30 for our next workshop and talk with Danielle Garrison. Thank you so much.